Somewhere in your home there is a thermostat. You set it up once and your home is warm with no extra work. The process takes around 4 seconds. For over 300,000 years, every human who has ever lived had to solve the same problem every winter without insulation, without a heating system, and without anything but what they could pull from the ground or cut from an animal with a stone tool. Most people believe ancient humans survived the Ice Age winters by pure endurance. They huddled miserably around small fires, just about making it through each night, losing people regularly to cold they had no real answer for. That isn't exactly right, but what archaeology has revealed across Russia, Ukraine, and Central Europe tells a completely different tale. This is not a story of luck, of surviving by chance, but a story of deliberate, precise engineering by people who had no formal education and no tools but bone, stone, and hide. Modern-day Arctic engineers have been amazed when looking at the remains of these ancient winter shelters. Military training in the Arctic now employs techniques derived directly from 20,000-year-old designs. We lost the knowledge and spent a century trying to rediscover it with modern science, only to find out that our ancestors had already solved it perfectly the first time. One of the first things archaeology got fundamentally wrong about your ancestors. The popular image of prehistoric humans sheltering in caves is largely a myth. Caves were used occasionally, but for the overwhelming majority of human history, caves were not where people lived. They were where people painted. At a Russian site dating back 800,000 years ago, researchers have uncovered circular depressions dug intentionally into the earth, up to 8 feet deep and 12 feet across. The marks of the soil implements showed that they were not natural formations. They were constructed. The depth was not just a haphazard phenomenon. The ground temperature at 6 to 8 feet below the surface is 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the air above, no matter what is happening at the surface. Your forefathers never battled with the cold. They ran under it. This was no happy accident. It was applied knowledge, known, and used purposefully through generations. The fact that they dug to a certain depth, rather than just digging until it felt deep enough, shows a knowledge of thermal physics that most people wouldn't think to attribute to humans living nearly 1 million years ago. This was only the beginning. What comes next in the archaeological record is far more sophisticated, built above ground, not underground, made from materials that totally confused researchers the first time they encountered them. At a site in the Czech Republic called Dolní Věstonice, dating from 26,000 years ago, archaeologists found winter shelters with walls made of several different layers. Each layer was not there for bulk or convenience. Each had an intentional and particular thermal function. The innermost layer was animal hide with the fur on the inside, locking warm air right against the bodies of the people inside. Outside were dried grass and moss, and for that exact reason, they pull moisture away from the inside before it can pool. The outermost layer was woven from reeds and bark and was resistant to wind, but still allowed air through so that moisture could escape outwards before it could freeze and damage the structure from the inside. This was not a hunch or a feeling. This was layered thermal engineering, the same physical principles that keep you warm in your walls today. Today's construction uses vapor barriers, insulating foam and weatherproofing membranes. The ancient builders used hide and moss and bark. They were different materials entirely. The physics was the same. That correspondence is not happenstance, nor a loose analogy. Engineers who have studied these ancient shelters have confirmed the overlap is technically precise. People lacking access to formal knowledge, a written record to consult, and tools besides stone independently came up with the same thermal solution that modern construction science eventually arrived at. They didn't fall into it. The evidence shows they knew exactly what each layer was doing. Archaeologists found something in Ukraine sites called Prehistoric and Kostenki that froze the researchers in their tracks when they first saw it. Not cave shelters, not primitive windbreaks, but actual engineered buildings constructed entirely of the bones of woolly mammoths. The foundation blocks were mammoth skulls over 200 pounds apiece. Curved tusks were used to build dome-like frameworks. Hundreds of smaller bones filled in the structural gaps and gave support everywhere. Then they covered the whole thing with layers of stitched mammoth hide, thick enough to keep the wind out completely and shaped precisely enough to shed snow rather than collect it. This is not improvisation or instinct. That is architecture with deliberate solutions to particular engineering problems. Experimental reconstructions of these houses have borne out what the archaeology had suggested. A stoutly built house of mammoth bones kept the interior temperatures 40 to 50 degrees warmer than the outside air air with only modest fires inside. Modern Arctic shelters with industrial insulation and electric heating systems often do no better under similar conditions. Stone Age builders using bones and stone tools achieved thermal performance comparable to modern Arctic engineering. That result has been quite a surprise to scientists who thought they'd find something impressive but primitive. Instead, they came up with a solution that is so complete that it has been difficult to improve upon with modern materials. That structure was not a stepping stone to better ideas. It was the answer reached by people who had nothing but necessity, observation, and time to depend upon. None of the engineering described so far functioned without fire, and fire inside these shelters was not simply a source of warmth placed in the middle of a room. It was a managed system with deliberate structure and specific logic behind every decision. A central hearth provided the primary heat source. Smaller secondary hearths were positioned around the perimeter of the shelter, creating distinct warm zones assigned to specific activities. Food preparation happened in one area, tool making in another. Infants and elderly members of the group were placed nearest to the warmest positions. The layout was planned in advance, not arranged by habit or convenience. Fuel management was equally sophisticated. On the treeless Eurasian steppe, wood was not reliably available. Chemical analysis of hearth residues at these sites shows that ancient humans burned mammoth dung and processed bone as primary fuel sources. Critically, these materials were not simply thrown onto the fire. The residue evidence shows they were deliberately prepared to produce specific heat outputs. They were not burning whatever was available. They were engineering combustion. Ventilation completed the system. Without proper airflow, moisture from breathing and cooking accumulates inside any enclosed space. In sub-zero temperatures, that moisture freezes, and a structure that cannot release moisture fails from the inside, regardless of how well it was built. Archaeological evidence at Kostenki shows intentional airflow design, with openings at ground level drawing fresh air in and larger openings near the top, allowing warm, moisture-laden air to escape continuously. Understanding what ancient humans built to survive winter is one thing. Understanding what they did inside those structures once the sun went down reveals something equally important about who they actually were. They did not sleep the way you sleep. Historical records across dozens of cultures and a controlled 1992 experiment by psychiatrist Thomas Ware confirm that the natural human sleep pattern, when removed from artificial light entirely, is not one continuous block. It is 2 phases of roughly 4 hours each, with a wakeful period of 1 to 2 hours in between. Every participant in Ware's experiment returned to this pattern automatically within weeks. Ancient humans living by firelight experienced this as simply the way nights worked. During that middle wakeful period and during the long hours before first sleep, something specific happened inside these shelters that archaeology has preserved evidence of. The famous Venus figurines found at Paleolithic sites were discovered predominantly in winter shelter contexts. Many of the cave paintings associated with this era were created during winter months, by firelight, during the long confinement that extreme cold enforced on entire communities. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner documented that among hunter-gatherer communities studied in modern times, nighttime conversation around fire shifted almost entirely to storytelling, myths, and shared memory. The art and narrative tradition that defined human culture was not created in comfortable summers. It emerged from people trapped inside bone houses on a frozen steppe with fire, time, and each other. At the end of the Ice Age, as temperatures rose and forests expanded across the steppe, the entire knowledge system built around surviving extreme cold was gradually abandoned. Not destroyed by catastrophe, not forgotten overnight, just slowly made unnecessary as conditions changed and the problems it solved stopped presenting themselves. Then, something revealing happened. Modern Arctic engineers began studying the archaeological remains of these shelters seriously, and what they found changed how several institutions approach extreme cold survival. Military Arctic training programs now teach shelter-building methods derived directly from archaeological reconstructions of these 20,000-year-old designs. Disaster relief organizations have adapted the same layered insulation principles for emergency construction in extreme environments. We lost the knowledge, spent roughly a century rediscovering it through modern materials, science, and arrived back at solutions our ancestors had already perfected using bones and stone tools. Go back to your thermostat. The number on it represents a temperature your ancestors would have found extraordinary, not because they could not achieve warmth, but because achieving it cost them everything. Weeks of preparation, months of planning beginning in late summer, continuous physical labor through autumn, engineering knowledge precise enough that a single miscalculation in ventilation or insulation could mean a family that did not survive until spring. The warmth you live inside without thinking about it is not something your generation invented or stumbled into. It is the end of a 300,000-year chain of knowledge, failure, refinement, and inheritance that ran unbroken from people building dome structures from mammoth bones on a frozen steppe directly to the walls surrounding you right now. You did not invent warmth. You inherited it from the most capable engineers who ever lived, who had nothing except cold, necessity, and the absolute refusal to stop solving the problem.